Lizian groaned in pain as the bright morning sunlight hit her face, her head feeling like it was splitting open. She looked around in confusion, realizing she was in the guest room rather than her own bedroom. Her heart dropped when she saw her clothes scattered all over the floor. She blinked rapidly, panic setting in as she whispered to herself that there was no way this could be happening. She buried her face in her hands, terrified that she had messed up completely. The story then introduced the setting: the Helios Empire, home to the Rottweiler family, who had amassed an immense fortune through the arms trade. Lizian was the youngest daughter of this prestigious house. Flashbacks revealed that just the day before, the family had held a lavish coming-of-age party for her 20th birthday. The guest list was decorated with high nobility, and the garden was filled with gorgeous flowers under the night sky. The atmosphere was intoxicating. Her parents had congratulated her, encouraging her to have a drink now that she was an adult. She thanked them enthusiastically, taking a glass. Her brother had stepped in, warning her not to drink too much. However, the crown prince and the duke's son, her childhood friend, approached her, both congratulating her and offering to share a drink. Lizian politely accepted, telling the crown prince the honor was hers and agreeing to another glass with her friend. By the time her brother warned her again that she should stop, she was already tipsy. She leaned against him, teasing that he was just jealous because he was still a minor and couldn't drink yet. Caught up in the celebration, she declared it a happy occasion and continued to drink glass after glass. Eventually, a man asked her for a dance. She handed her wine glass to her brother, Evan, telling him to hold it, and went to the dance floor. She kept dancing, but her memory began to blur. She couldn't remember the face of the man she had her last dance with, only recalling that he was tall and had a surprisingly firm chest. The memory shifted to a more intimate scene. She remembered that they had kissed. Then came the sound of a door creaking open and the rustle of clothes falling to the floor. She recalled a hug, being lifted up, and the sound of footsteps carrying her. She had been laid on the bed, and a man's voice had whispered that she was beautiful. He had touched her face and hand, calling her smile beautiful and her pouty face adorable. He had squeezed her hand tight and told her he loved her. Back in the present, Lizian sat on the bed wrapped in a sheet, feeling a strange, bittersweet emotion. But the reality of the situation quickly took over, and she screamed in disbelief, clutching her head. Suddenly, loud banging came from the door. A voice shouted, asking if she was in there and why she was yelling. Lizian flinched, instantly recognizing the voice. The door flew open and her father and brother burst in, shouting her name in panic. Her brother froze in his tracks when he saw her appearance. Lizian stood up, fumbling with the bedsheet to cover herself, stammering as she tried to explain. Her mother then walked in, sighing deeply. She asked Isekai just how far she would go to make her mother worry. Lizian apologized, but her mother was furious. She scolded Lizian, bringing up how she used to fool around with mercenaries and how she had promised to conduct herself properly as a noblewoman after her coming-of-age party. Her mother glared at her, demanding to know if she had nothing to say for herself. Lizian tried to stutter that it wasn't what it looked like. But her mother pointed sharply at the men's shoes and clothes on the floor, stating that she had eyes and knew exactly what had happened. Her brother tried to calm their mother down, but she ignored him, crumpling the bedsheet in her hand. She turned on Lizian, demanding to know who the man was. Lizian paused, looking nervous and cornered. She stammered that the thing was, regarding the man, she had something to say. Lizian clutches her head, face twisted in pure distress. She can't remember a single thing about the man's identity. She slumps onto the edge of the bed, letting out a heavy, defeated sigh. This is insane. She pulls at her hair. Spiraling, she wanted freedom, sure, but she definitely didn't want to be exiled from high society. She remembers making a solemn promise to her mother just recently, that once she was an adult, she would at least pretend to be modest and obedient. And now, she's sitting on the floor of a guest room, head in her hands, wondering where it all went wrong. She flops back onto the mattress, staring blankly at the ceiling. No matter how hard she racks her brain, the pieces won't fit. She asks herself the million-dollar question, who was it? But then, a flush rises to her cheeks. Her expression softens, eyes closing as a fragmented memory surfaces. She can't remember the face, but she remembers the feeling. It was amazing. Flashbacks hit her in sensory waves. A firm, muscular chest, a sculpted stomach. She doesn't recall his voice, but his presence felt deeply familiar. And the way he kissed her. She snaps out of it, rolling around on the bed in chibi-style frustration. Why does she remember the abs but not the name? It's torture. She sits up, eyes narrowing. Time for some detective work. She decides to profile the suspects. She only hung out with people her age at the party. Her brother's friends are cleared since they were with him all night. That leaves 3 prime candidates. Of candidate number 1, Therion Helios, the crown prince. Lizian recalls how he's shown interest in her since her debut, always hovering nearby. A flashback shows him kissing her hand at age 15, looking charming. But she remembers her brother's warning. The prince isn't serious. Lizian shudders, picturing his cold, calculating eyes. She's never had feelings for him. He's only forward during public banquets, almost like he's putting on a show for an audience. She shakes her head. It doesn't feel right. Candidate number 2's, Grey Earl Doberman, the Duke's son, her childhood friend and self-proclaimed sidekick. Memories play of them as kids, poking things with sticks and causing chaos. There's zero romantic spark there. Plus, she remembers a specific incident where they broke a vase. Grey immediately bolted, leaving her to take the blame. She pauses, a realization hitting her. Gray is quick and quiet. He could disappear without a trace. But then she imagines Gray whispering her name sweetly in bed, and her face turns blue with horror. She hugs herself, trembling. That is a nightmare scenario. They're friends, it's too weird. Ask candidate number 3's Evan. He's the wild card. A flashback reveals a younger Lijun being cornered by thugs in an alleyway, only for Evan to step in and save her. Since that day, the family has treated him like royalty, which is why a mercenary like him was at a noble's coming-of-age party. She considers him. He was the only person she really knew there. But he's a commoner, and more importantly, she sees him as a little brother. She clenches the fabric of her dress, refusing to believe she could have seen him as a man. Lizan stops. She realizes she's overthinking the Sue and ignoring the Swat. She stares at a cup of tea on the table, her grip tightening until her knuckles turn white. Regardless of who it was, the fact remains he left her. He ran away after her first time. Rage begins to bubble up. The embarrassment fades, replaced by pure fury. She grinds her teeth. Glaring at the cup, he abandoned her. Oh, he's going to pay. She decides she won't just hand him over to her father, she's going to punish him herself first. Frustrated that the culprit won't just magically appear, Lizan stands up, eyes burning with determination. If she wants answers, she has to go get them. She grabs a dark coat, throwing it over her shoulders with a dramatic flare. She's done guessing. It's time to hunt. She heads for the door, setting her sights on the first suspect on her list. The carriage clatters to a halt outside the Grand Doberman estate. Lijun steps out, looking determined. She's done the math based on the servants' schedules. Gray is the easiest suspect to pin down first. She marches toward the entrance, ready to interrogate her childhood friend. A butler greets her at the door. But before she can demand to see Gray, he drops a curveball. The Duchess, Gray's mother, wants to see her personally. Lizan freezes. The Duchess has never requested a private audience with her before. A wave of anxiety washes over her as she follows the butler through the opulent halls. She enters the drawing room where the Duchess is elegantly sipping tea. Lizan curtsies, trying to keep her composure, but her heart is pounding. The Duchess smiles warmly and asks about the coming-of-age party. Lizan gives a polite, generic answer, but her internal monologue is screaming. Why is she here? The Duchess sets her cup down with a sharp clink and says she called Lijian because she's a close friend of Gray's. Lijian goes pale. Her mind instantly spirals into worst-case scenarios. Did Gray tell his mother? Is the Duchess about to scold her for defiling her son? Is she about to be exiled from high society for being a bad influence? But the Duchess isn't here to scold her. She's here to deliver news. She reveals that Gray left early this morning. Lizian blinks, confused. Left. The Duchess explains that Gray received a direct order from the Emperor to escort the Crown Prince on a tour of the entire empire. He was supposed to leave 2 days ago but fought to stay just for Lizian's birthday. Now that the party is over, he's gone. And because they have to visit every small estate, the tour will take at least 3 years. Lizin's mind goes blank. 3 years. The Duchess continues chatting, asking Lijun to visit often to keep her company, but Lijun barely hears her. She realizes with dawning horror that she won't be able to see Gray, or the Crown Prince, for 3 whole years. Her investigation has hit a massive dead end before it even started. Cut to the carriage ride home. Lijun sits in silence, staring out the window. The shock is wearing off, replaced by a crushing sense of abandonment. She clutches her dress, trembling. Last night wasn't a mistake to her. He had whispered that he loved her. So why did he leave her all alone without a word? Later, at the Rottweiler family dinner, the mood is tense. Lijun sits with her parents and Evan, staring blankly at her plate. Her mother chides her, telling her to eat up. It's her favorite dish, a juicy steak. Lijun looks down at the meat. The sight of it makes her stomach churn violently. She clamps a hand over her mouth, gagging, and bolts from the table, leaving her family confused. She rushes into the bathroom, leaning over the sink, gasping for air. She feels weak, dizzy, and incredibly nauseous. A knock comes at the door. It's her mother, asking if she's alright. Lijun turns to open it, thinking she just needs some medicine for a stomach bug. But as she reaches for the handle, her vision swims. She sways on her feet, realizing too late that things are definitely not looking good. With a sickening thud, Lijun collapses onto the cold tiled floor. The sound echoes through the hallway, followed immediately by the frantic screams of her family rushing to her aid. She wakes up in her bed, blinking groggily at the ceiling. The room is filled with people. Her mother is weeping into her hands, her brother looks pale with worry, and the family doctor stands awkwardly to the side. But it's her father's expression that sends a chill down her spine. He isn't worried, he is seething. Lijun asks what's wrong, confused by the heavy atmosphere. Her father steps forward, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. He asks how big of a mess she intends to make, demanding to know why she hid this from them. Lijun is baffled, asking what on earth he's talking about. The revelation drops like a bomb. Her father shouts the truth she hadn't realized herself: she is pregnant. Lijun freezes, her mind reeling. Pregnant from that one night, the doctor awkwardly excuses herself, sensing the incoming storm. As soon as the door clicks shut, her father's demeanor shifts from anger to cold ruthlessness. He gives her a simple, horrifying order: get rid of the baby. Lijun's protective instincts snap into place instantly. She refuses. Her father explodes, shouting her full name, Lijun Visha Rottweiler. Her brother tries to hold him back, begging him to calm down, while her mother continues to sob. Lijun clutches her stomach, her voice shaking but firm. She declares that this is her child, and she will raise it regardless of whether it has a father or not. Her father scoffs. throwing reality in her face. She's unmarried, has no assets, and will be the laughingstock of high society. He asks how she plans to survive. Lijun admits he's right about her situation, but then she plays her ace card. She looks her father in the eye and declares that she will inherit the family's firearms business. Her father and brother are stunned. Lijun explains that since her brother plans to enter the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the business needs a successor. She admits she used to be immature, but things have changed. She argues that her close relationship with mercenaries has given her unique insight into what weapons are actually needed for war. She points out that the family hasn't produced a new gun in a while and proposes a new design she's had in mind. A firearm that is shorter, easier to carry, and more accurate than anything currently on the market. She makes a vow. She will change her narrative. She won't be remembered as the noblewoman who had a scandal, but as Lizian, the brilliant weapon developer and businesswoman. She begs her father to let her protect her child. Her father stares at her, seeing a new resolve in his daughter's eyes. He relents, but only slightly. He demands a sketch of this new product to see if she's serious. But he gives a harsh warning: even if she succeeds, society will be cruel. They will only see a fatherless child, and she will likely never find a husband. Lizian accepts these terms without hesitation. Her father agrees to let her keep the baby, but with one final, cold condition: the family will not help her find the father. She must take full responsibility for her carelessness. Lijun agrees, placing a hand on her stomach, determined to face the consequences. A few months later, the season has changed. Lizian walks through the garden, her baby bump now clearly visible under her dress. She's been in seclusion, working and hiding away from the prying eyes of society. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out her name. She turns to see Evan, the mercenary, waving cheerfully at her from the garden gate. He runs over, grinning, and drops a bombshell of his own. He's been snooping around. He knew her seclusion wasn't just about developing a new product. He looks at her, his eyes drifting to her stomach, and smiles gently. He invites her to sit down and talk, saying, "So that's what happened." Back in the garden, the atmosphere shifted from tense to tender. Avon sat beside Lijun, casually asking if she thought the baby would be a boy or a girl. He joked that he hoped for a girl, though if she were anything like Lizian, she'd be a handful. He teased that he wanted a well-behaved child like himself, earning a scoff from Lizian, who called him shameless. But then, Evan's expression softened into something painful and longing. He leaned in, whispering that he wished the child were his. He placed a hand on her baby bump, his voice dropping as he admitted that if it were his, maybe she would finally see him as a real man. He tried to sell himself, saying he might be a better father than she thought. Lizin's heart ached for a moment. If she weren't a noble, and he weren't a commoner, maybe it could have worked. But reality was cruel. She slapped his hand away, masking her emotions with a joke, telling him to save those lines for his own future children. Evan didn't laugh, he froze, then took her hand, his gaze intense. He made a solemn vow: if he became someone great, a real man with a title who could take responsibility, would she marry him? He kissed her hand, his eyes burning with determination. He promised to become a nobleman and return for her. Lijun was stunned into silence, unable to process his words as he stood up and walked away, leaving her with a promise that sounded impossible. He was a mercenary, how could he become a noble? But as he left, he warned her to take care of herself and the baby, his silhouette disappearing with a final wave. 5 years passed. The scene shifted to a bright, sunny day. Lizian, now looking more mature, was frantically searching the garden, calling out for Adele. She found her child near the gates. A cute little boy with dark hair and bright golden eyes, playing happily with his grandfather, the Marquis. Lizian scolded the child gently for running off, but her internal monologue revealed a shocking secret. Adele was actually her daughter, Adelwis. Flashbacks revealed the chaos of the last 5 years. Avon had actually followed through on his insane promise, volunteering for the brutal war at the northwest border to earn a title. Meanwhile, Grey and the Crown Prince's tour of the Empire had dragged on far longer than expected, lasting years instead of months. Because of their absence, Lizian had given birth alone, never finding the father. Her father, the Marquis, couldn't bear the thought of his daughter raising an illegitimate girl in a society that would tear her apart. So, he made a drastic decision. The child would be raised as a boy, a son, too weak to leave the estate, until the father was found or the situation could be resolved. Back in the present, Lijun looked at her daughter dressed in boy's clothes, her heart aching. Adele was known in high society as a sickly hare, confined to the grounds. Lijun vowed again to find the father and restore her daughter's true identity. Suddenly, a servant sprinted toward them with an urgent letter from the Doberman household. The Marquis opened it, his face falling. He broke the news to Lizian. Lord Doberman, the Duke, had passed away yesterday. But that wasn't all. The Marquis turned to Lijun with a grave expression. The death of the Duke meant the succession had to happen immediately. He delivered the news that made Lijun's blood run cold. After 5 long years, the Crown Prince and Grey, the new Duke, were finally coming back. Lijun confirms that their first public appearance will likely be at the upcoming hunting competition. A shadow crosses her face as she realizes there isn't much time left. Her body begins to tremble with anxiety, and she tells herself she just has to wait a little longer. Noticing her distress, little Adele hugs Lijun's leg, asking if something is wrong. Lijun freezes for a split second before masking her emotions. She smiles gently, reassuring Adele that nothing is wrong and suggesting they go get something to eat. As the Marquis watches them, Lijin tells him they should discuss the details inside. Her expression hardens into a look of steely determination as she thinks to herself that it begins again, vowing to find the man responsible. The scene shifts to the bustling Imperial hunting competition, a major festival where participants showcase new weapons. Inside the armory, an attendant asks Lizian which gun she will choose. She selects the Grande, which she developed 5 years ago to protect Adele, and the Etoile, finished just last month. She decides this is the perfect opportunity to demonstrate what her weapons are capable of. Lijin straps on her holster and secures her coat, checking her reflection with a sharp, confident gaze. She declares it's time to go see some rich people. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out from behind, asking if she has been well. She turns to see the crown prince, Therion, framed by white lilies. He greets her with a charming smile. Lizian bows formally, but the prince insists there is no need for such formalities. She thanks him, noting it has been a while. The prince leans in uncomfortably close, teasing her that she doesn't listen or perhaps has forgotten him due to the passage of time. Lizian apologizes stiffly, but the prince just grins, remarking that he wasn't seeking an apology. Just then, another man approaches, Grey Doberman. He comments on how long it has been, noting that Lizian has become even more beautiful in the last 5 years. As he stares at her, he begins to say she has really grown, but before he can finish, the sound of a gun cocking cuts him off. Lizian has drawn her revolver and pointed it directly at his face. She coldly warns him that if he says another word, she will consider it harassment. An announcement blares that the competition is starting soon. Suddenly, a voice shouts for them to wait. A man in a black uniform with a fur collar dashes toward them. It is Evan. He beams at Lizian, excited to see her. Lizian is shocked, asking how he got in since commoners aren't allowed. Evan smiles confidently, revealing he is no longer a commoner. The king has made him a baron with the surname Husky. Evan takes Lizian's hand, reminding her of the promise he made to return as a nobleman. Lizian stares at him, realizing he kept his word. The tender moment is interrupted by the crown prince, who steps in with a feigned polite surprise, noting he hadn't seen the mercenary turned noble there. Lizian looks at the 3 men standing before her. The crown prince, Grey, and Evan. She realizes that finally, the 3 people who hold the answers she seeks are all in one place. Her mind races back to the night of the incident 5 years ago. She recalls that the party was closely guarded by the household knights because of the crown prince's attendance, meaning no outsiders could enter. The guests included older nobles, the Maltese princess, and Grey, who stayed at the mansion. The knight at the main gate reported seeing the royal carriage leave in the middle of the night, but because he didn't open the curtains, he couldn't confirm if the crown prince was actually inside. As for Evan, no one remembered him because, as a commoner at the time, he was invisible to the nobility. Lizian concludes that besides those 3, everyone else was accounted for. It is definitely one of them. Outside, the official raises a pistol to signal the start of the event. He shouts for the competition to begin. On the mark, a loud bang echoes through the air. The scene shifts to the mountains and forests of the hunting grounds. Hidden amongst the green foliage, Lizian clutches her weapon, her eyes narrowing with predatory focus. She thinks to herself that they can hide all they want, but she will find the truth. Lizian walks side by side with Grey Doberman through the dappled sunlight of the forest path. The silence between them is heavy, unlike the easy banter of their childhood. Lizian glances at him sideways, noting his unusual quietness. She assumes it must be the weight of his new title and the recent passing of his father, the former duke. She decides to break the ice, asking softly if he was able to say his goodbyes properly. Grey looks genuinely surprised that she cares, a faint, almost self-deprecating smile touching his lips. He admits it's been a while since he heard something so kind from her. Lizian frowns, offended that he'd think otherwise, and reminds him that her family barred her from the funeral, so she never got the chance to pay her respects. Grey stops walking, his polished shoes crunching on the stone path. He explains that the closed funeral was his mother's decision. The scene briefly shifts to a visualization of what noble funerals usually are. A theatrical performance where people feign grief while exchanging business cards and bribes, vultures circling a fresh carcass to impress the new head of the house. Grey's eyes are cold as he recounts how his mother refused to let them turn his father's death into a social event. He admits he's been drowning in work for the past 5 years, barely able to catch his breath. Lizian observes him closely. He's different. The boy she knew is gone, replaced by this stoic, overburdened duke. Grey catches her staring and asks if that's a compliment. Lizian notes that he doesn't joke around anymore. Grey agrees, they are past that now. Then, the conversation takes a sharp turn. Grey brings up the rumors. He knows she has a child no one has ever seen. He questions the wisdom of presenting a fatherless heir to high society, asking what kind of attention she thinks that will bring. Lizian bristles, her protective instincts flaring. She knows the world judges her, but she won't let Adele be collateral damage. Grey reaches out, gently plucking a stray leaf from her hair. He admits he wanted to find her sooner but was tied down by family matters. Then, he looks her dead in the eye and drops the bombshell Lizian was dreading, or perhaps hoping for. I am not the father of your child. Lizian's face falls. She admits, with brutal honesty, that she was actually hoping it was him. Grey looks stunned by her words. Internally, Lizian thinks that if it were Grey, it would be simple. Unlike the crown prince, who she senses is a manipulative snake using her for political leverage against her family, Grey has always been. Grey seems rattled by her confession. He grabs her wrist, his grip firm, advising her to calm down. He suggests that if she just waits, the real father might come forward on his own. Lijin stares at him, incredulous. Wait, just sit around and hope. She yanks her arm free, her hand drifting to the revolver at her hip. She plays along, smiling sharply. She agrees that a skilled hunter knows when to wait for their prey. But internally she scoffs. She isn't going to wait patiently. She's going to hunt them down, gather evidence, and wring the truth out of them. She turns to continue the hunt, suggesting they catch something since they are in a competition. But Gray doesn't follow. He stands still, pressing a hand against his throat, a strange magical light glowing beneath his fingers. Lijin calls out to him, confused. Gray looks up, his expression unreadable. Your prey is coming, he says ominously. Just wait a moment. Suddenly, the earth trembles. A massive rumbi shakes the forest, sending birds scattering. Lijin freezes, eyes wide. The footsteps are heavy, rhythmic, and getting louder. Something huge is approaching. A giant, monstrous claw slams onto the path in front of them with a deafening thud. A massive black bear emerged from the dense foliage, growling with a menacing, guttural vibration that shook the air. Lijin stared at the beast in disbelief, identifying it as a Dothbury black bear and questioning why such a creature was active when it should still be deep in hibernation. Beside her, Gray wore a confident smirk, remarking that he had told her the prey was coming. Lijin looked at him with suspicion, wondering internally why he spoke as if he had known the animal's exact path and where he drew such confidence from. To Lijin's shock, Gray casually reached into his coat and produced a packet of biscuits. The bear lowered its massive head and began crunching on the treats. Lijin thought he must be crazy to lure a predator with snacks, but Gray simply asked what her plan was. He suggested that since the beast was already there, she should shoot it down, reminding her that she was a skilled hunter. Lijin observed the bear, noting it was much larger than she anticipated. She realized she would need to take it down in a single shot to avoid being attacked. She waited patiently for the creature to turn its back. The moment it moved, she shouted, "Now," in her mind and fired her revolver. The shot rang out, and the bear collapsed instantly. Gray blew smoke from the barrel of his own gun, though he hadn't fired, and complimented Lijin, saying she still had her touch. Lijin brushed off the praise, asking who he was trying to flatter and asserting that the catch belonged to her regardless of his compliments. She warned him not to try stealing it. Gray grinned, calling her clever and noting it was a shame she was so sharp. He stated he couldn't be fooled and intended to tie the bear up and take it with him. He clarified that he wasn't planning to participate in the competition, so they should just take the prize and leave. Lijin agreed but admitted she couldn't lift something so heavy, so Gray helped her load the carcass onto their transport. Just as they finished, Gray's voice turned sharp as he ordered Lijin to stop and freeze. He warned her not to move. Behind her, a second bear with glowing red eyes loomed out of the shadows. The beast roared and swung a massive paw. Lijin flinched, but Gray stepped in, swinging his sword to intercept the attack. He grunted in pain as the impact jarred him. Lijin screamed his name in panic. The bear roared again, and in the chaos Gray lost his grip on his weapon, the sword flying from his hand and landing in the dirt with a metallic ring. Seeing Gray in danger, Lijin dashed forward. She panicked, realizing she had to shoot the beast but fearing she might hit Gray in the process. She tried to steady her aim, telling herself to focus. The bear turned its aggression toward her, and she screamed, "Please," as it closed the distance. Before the beast could strike, Gray recovered his sword and lunged, stabbing the bear deeply. The creature twitched twice before collapsing with a heavy thud. Gray wiped the sweat and dirt from his face, immediately asking if Lijin was okay. Lijin, who had fallen to the ground in the scuffle, sat there stunned before replying that she thought she was all right. Gray looked at the second carcass and generously offered to say she caught this one as well. Lijin refused, pointing out that the bear had clearly been killed by a sword, not a bullet, and no one would believe her. Gray mused that they could blame it on her guard, Baron Husky. Lijin snapped at him, asking why he was bringing up the Baron and telling him to stop talking nonsense and tie up the bear. As they secured the animals, Lijin noticed the first bear was male and the second was female. Suddenly, a small girl drew their attention to the bushes. A tiny bear cub emerged, looking frightened. Lijin realized the two bears they had just killed were likely the cub's parents. She felt a wave of guilt, noting how young it was and how dangerous it would be for it to live alone in the forest. Gray watched her expression and suggested that if it bothered her so much, she should take it home. He observed that she looked as if the cub reminded her of her own child. Lijin hesitated, arguing that the wildlife was the property of the crown prince and she couldn't just take it. Gray assured her that the prince would likely let her take it as a prize if she asked. Lijin considered this and said, "Maybe." She then asked Gray to hand over the biscuits he had used earlier. He dropped the packet into her palm. Lijin crouched down, softening her expression, and gently beckoned the cub to come to her. As the cub approached, Lijin smiled, but internally she felt a nagging suspicion that the entire situation made no sense. The scene shifted abruptly to the competition grounds, where flags waved and trumpets blared. The crowd chattered excitedly. Gray stood at the center of attention, having taken first place. Lijin watched him from the sidelines. Her gaze was critical as she thought to herself that, in her eyes, he wasn't the slightest bit handsome. However, she conceded internally that if a woman could handle his difficult personality, the rest of what he had to offer wasn't so bad. Her train of thought was interrupted when a voice called out, "Lady Rottweiler." Lijin turned to find Crown Prince Theron standing behind her, resplendent in his white and gold uniform. He smiled charmingly, noting that she seemed to have finished her hunt safely. Lijin dipped her head respectfully, replying that she planned to rest a bit before returning home. The prince stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of hair from her face. With a captivating smile, he asked if she would give him a moment of her time before she left. The scene shifted to a private room where the two sat across from each other at a small round table. The silence was heavy. Lijun sat stiffly, wondering why he was being so quiet and what he possibly wanted to discuss. Finally, the prince broke the silence, mentioning that he saw she and Lord Doberman had caught the Dothbury black bears during the tournament. He explained that the bear's liver was a world-renowned delicacy and that everyone would be grateful for the catch. Sensing the implication, Lijun immediately offered the bear to him, saying she would present it to him first. The prince laughed lightly and thanked her, but then, his expression shifted to something more probing. He remarked that, seemed to be doing well. Lijun tensed but played along, confirming that he was. The prince asked how old the child was now. 5 years old now. Lijun answered, her hand trembling slightly as she set her teacup down. The prince leaned his chin on his hand, his green eyes locking onto hers. He suggested that, given the age, it was perhaps time for some introductions. Lijun flinched visibly. The prince began to speak of the boy, referring to him with a possessive familiarity. Lijun quickly interrupted, desperate to shut down this line of conversation. She argued that the child was still too young and unprepared, expressing fear that he would embarrass himself or do something impolite. The prince dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand, smiling and saying that all children were like that, so it was no problem. He grinned, leaving no room for argument. Lijun tried to protest, stammering a but, only for the prince to press her with a sharp but. Defeated, Lijun squeezed the fabric of her dress tightly in her lap. She lowered her head and murmured that it was nothing, and she understood. The prince beamed, saying he was quite curious to meet this mysterious child and would look forward to it. Later, Lijun sat in her carriage, the weight of the conversation crushing her. She realized with dread that she would have to bring Adele to the banquet tomorrow. She sighed deeply, exhausted. She had planned to return home immediately, but it was already late. Her mind flashed back to the prince kissing her hand and explicitly stating he would see her and the young Rottweiler child at the banquet. She clutched her clothes in frustration, thinking it was far too early for Edil to make a societal debut. She regretted not attending more social gatherings to understand the political currents better. Feeling completely out of her depth, she decided she would have to ask her brother for advice when he came home. A soft whine interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Lijun looked down to see the bear cub sitting on the carriage seat next to her. It looked up with sad eyes. She asked if it wanted to go outside, but told it to hold on a little longer. She picked the heavy cub up and it flopped comfortably onto her lap. Lijun stared at her reflection in the window, wondering how on earth things had ended up like this. The carriage clattered over the cobblestones, arriving at the Rottweiler estate under the cover of night. The butler opened the door, greeting her, but froze when he saw the black beast in her arms. He stammered, asking what that was. Lijun passed the cub to him, instructing him to find an empty cage and clarifying that it was not for eating. She intended to raise it. She then asked what Adele was doing. The butler explained that the child had been waiting up for her but had fallen asleep just a moment ago. Lijun felt a pang of guilt, realizing Adele had waited even though she had warned she would be late. She entered the house, planning to peek into Adele's room, but was intercepted by a maid. The maid gasped, horrified by Lijun's appearance. She exclaimed that she had heard Lijun caught something big, but she hadn't expected her clothes to be in such a state. Lijun rubbed her neck sheepishly, muttering that things just sort of happened. The maid immediately took charge, grabbing Lijun's jacket and ordering her to go wash up in the bath she had prepared. Lijun complied, deciding she shouldn't see Adele while covered in grime. She sank into the warm water, finally feeling her muscles relax. As she watched rose petals float on the surface, her thoughts drifted to gray. She looked at her hand, thinking about how much he had changed over the last 5 years, so much that she barely recognized him. She knew his father had passed away, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something else had happened to him. Her musings were cut short when she noticed a yellow rubber duck floating in the tub. She tapped it, and it let out a small squeak. The toy brought her mind back to the pressing problem Adele. Lijun rested her chin on her arms, staring at the duck and worried about how to dress the child for tomorrow. Overwhelmed, she thought to herself that she just wanted to run away and forget the banquet entirely. Lijun sank into the warm bathwater, her mind drifting to thoughts of escape. She mused that if she fled deep into the north with the help of the mercenaries, no one would be able to find her. She considered Evan, thinking he was stupidly nice enough to agree to take her, but she quickly dismissed the idea with a heavy sigh, realizing she would only cause more trouble. Her moment of respite was shattered when a maid burst into the bathroom, screaming that something terrible had happened. Lijun sat up, startled, reminding the maid it was the middle of the night. The maid, pale with panic, announced that the young master had disappeared. Shocked, Lijun scrambled out of the bath, water dripping from her skin as she threw on a robe. She rushed barefoot down the hallway, her mind racing. She burst into Adele's room, shouting his name, but the room was empty. The bed was made and there was no sign of her child. Panic began to set in. She told herself he had to be inside the house, but a darker thought crept into her mind. Why was she suddenly thinking of the crown prince? She tried to shake off the worry, telling herself there was no reason for the prince to take Adele, but she couldn't forget the rumors about his secret order of knights. A sense of doom washed over her as she imagined the worst, that he had really taken her son. Her mother looked up with tear-filled eyes and choked out that Adele was gone. Lijin's fear spiked, and she voiced the thought that had been plaguing her: what if his grace had taken him? She explained to her mother that the prince had been suddenly very interested in Adele at the competition and had insisted she bring him to the banquet, which was incredibly strange behavior. Her mother grabbed Lijin's hands firmly, telling her to calm down. She revealed that Lijin's father and brother had already searched Adele's room and found no signs of an intruder. She tried to reassure Lizian, suggesting that Adele was likely just hiding somewhere in the house, full of energy just as Lijin had been as a child. Just then, another maid dashed toward them, shouting for her mistress. She delivered the news they had been desperate to hear: they had found the young lord. Lijin's face washed with relief and confusion as she asked where he was. She stumbled forward, urging the maid to lead the way. They hurried down the stairs and through the corridors until the maid stopped in front of a door. Lijin threw it open, shouting Adele's name. Inside, Grey Doberman stood holding the sleeping child. He pressed a finger to his lips, hushing Lizian and telling her to be quiet because Adele was sleeping. Lizin's shoulders slumped in relief. She asked where Grey had found him. Grey explained that Adele had been in the storage room attached to the kitchen, the one they used to raise sheep. Lizin sighed, relieved but exhausted, noting that Adele had disappeared like this once before. Adele stirred in Grey's arms, yawning and blinking his large eyes. He looked at Lizian and murmured, "Mama." Lijin looked at him sternly but gently, asking why he had disappeared when he had promised not to. Adele pointed a small finger at Grey and said that he had been calling him. Lijin looked confused, asking who was calling. Adele pointed past Grey to a cage in the corner. He explained that the baby bear was crying for its mama, so he had stayed with him to keep him company. Lizian realized he had been talking to the bear cub she had brought home. She softened, understanding his innocence. She told him it was very late and asked if he wanted to come sleep with her. Adele agreed happily. Grey handed the boy over to Lizian, but his expression remained serious. He told her to put Adele to sleep first because she would be busy preparing for the banquet tomorrow, but then he needed her to come talk to him for a moment. Later, in the quiet of the parlor, Grey and Lizian sat opposite each other. Grey brought up the banquet, mentioning he heard she was taking Adele and that her mother would be accompanying them. Lizian confirmed it, admitting she was truly worried. She hesitated before voicing her deepest fear: what if His Highness really was Adele's father? She insisted she had not the slightest desire to use Adele to become the crown princess. Seeing her panic rising again, Grey slammed his hand on the table to get her attention. He told her to calm down and listen. He explained that the crown prince was not in a great position politically. He recounted the history of the imperial family. The emperor had 2 wives, the empress and the first queen. The empress had been unable to conceive for a long time, so Prince Therion, the son of the first queen, was named crown prince. However, 15 years ago, the empress miraculously gave birth to a son named Prince Rodan. Grey concluded that although Therion still held the title, his position was now under threat, explaining his erratic and aggressive behavior. Grey continued his explanation, revealing the precarious position of the crown prince. He detailed how Prince Rodan, the son of the empress, had been consistently developing new products for the Imperial Ministry of Food since he was 5 years old. Grey pointed out that even if Rodan had no ambition for the throne, his talent and lineage as the empress's son made him a natural threat that the crown prince couldn't ignore. He explained that when the emperor discovered the crown prince's feelings of insecurity, he had sent him away from the capital for 5 years under the guise of becoming more cultured, a move that likely displeased Therion greatly. Lizian interrupted, acknowledging that she knew the prince wanted to protect his throne, but she asked what any of that had to do with Adele. Grey urged her to think about it. He reasoned that since Therion had been away for 5 years, he had lost touch with high society and needed to secure support from the nobility to protect his position. His best option was to forge a connection with the powerful Rottweiler family. Grey warned that if the prince convinced Lizian and Adele to side with him, her family and their vassals would naturally follow. Lizian looked distressed, realizing the danger. Grey stated that he was sure the prince would treat Adele like his own child at the banquet tomorrow, regardless of the truth. He then laid out a specific plan before the prince could make his move. Lizian had to act as if she already knew who Adele's father was. And that person had to be Lord Grey Doberman. He argued that since their families had been close for a long time, it wouldn't raise suspicion. He instructed her to tell Adele to be friendly with him in public. Lizian protested, reminding him that he had explicitly stated he wasn't the father. Grey countered that the truth didn't matter right now. What mattered was acting the part to prevent Adele from being used as a political pawn. He looked at her intensely, asking if she understood. Lizian stared back, the gravity of the situation sinking in. The scene shifted to the following evening. Sunlight streamed through the window as Lizian finished dressing Adele. She smiled, telling him he looked handsome and that he looked amazing in everything. Internally, she thought he would have looked much prettier in a dress, but she accepted that this was nice too. Adele beamed, telling his mama that she looked pretty like a princess from a story. A maid announced that Lord Doberman would be arriving soon. Lizian, looking nervous, gulped and ordered the maid to send him to her room once he arrived. Moments later, the door opened and Grey entered. He stood with his arms crossed, immediately lodging a complaint. He criticized her for choosing such a tame look, insisting that a bolder style suited her better. Lizian, annoyed, asked him to knock it off, wondering internally if this man was really the one who should be escorting her since all he did was mouth off. As Adele stood up, Lysian noticed a dark bruise on his arm. She grabbed his hand gently, asking why there was a bruise and if it had been there yesterday. She worriedly asked if he had bumped into something while running around. Adele looked up with wide, confused eyes, asking what was wrong. Lysian quickly composed herself, saying nothing was wrong. She suggested getting him something shiny to wear over the spot. She pinned a brooch shaped like a red berry onto his jacket. Adele asked what it was, marveling at how pretty it looked. Lysian explained it was a dothberry fruit, the favorite food of the bear they had caught. Adele asked if they were tasty. Gray chimed in, remarking that while it was a well-known berry, it was usually eaten by commoners when food was scarce. Lysian simply acknowledged the fact, and Gray stared at her silently for a moment before saying her name. When she looked up, he told her that if she was ready, they should leave. Lysian took a deep breath, her expression hardening with resolve, and said, "All right." They left the room, Gray offering his arm to her. As they walked down the grand hallway, he asked if she would be all right. Lysian clenched her fist, asserting that she would be fine since she hadn't done anything wrong. Gray accepted her answer. The large doors to the banquet hall creaked open, revealing a room filled with light and chatter. Lysian and Gray walked down the red carpet, Adele trailing slightly behind them. The guests whispered and stared as they passed. Gray leaned in, telling Lysian he would be nearby if she needed him and advising her not to strain herself. Lysian agreed, and Gray stepped away. Lysian stood with her mother and Adele. She gently told Adele that he would be with Mama and Grandma today, and warned him not to stray too far. Adele agreed cheerfully. Meanwhile, the whispers around them grew louder. Guests gossiped about the Rottweiler child. Confirming he was the boy from the rumors, they scrutinized him as he asked his grandmother for a drink, remarking that for all the secrecy, he seemed like nothing special. Lysian heard the comments and tried to steel herself, determined not to let it affect her, but the judgment still stung. Suddenly, a hand grasped her shoulder from behind. Startled, she turned around to hear a familiar voice call her name. She looked up in surprise to see a man with dark hair and dark eyes standing there. It was Evan. Lysian turned around in surprise and asked the man what he was doing there. Evan, looking dashing in a black suit, he replied with a smile that he was a baron now, so there was no reason he shouldn't be in a place like this. He chuckled and then shifted his tone, complimenting Lysian by saying she looked especially lovely that evening. Lysian blushed slightly but deflected the praise, noting that it was, after all, a banquet. Evan remarked that he thought she didn't particularly like this sort of place regardless of her title. Lysian admitted that was true. But Evan grinned and confessed that the only reason he was there was because he thought he'd get to see her dressed up. Lysian called him too kind, but Evan insisted that he thought she was pretty no matter what she wore. Their conversation was interrupted when Adele came dashing over, shouting, "Mama!" Evan looked down, asking who the child was. Lysian introduced him, saying, Right, you haven't met yet. This is Adele." Evan knelt down to eye level with the boy. He introduced himself kindly, saying his name was Evan Husky and it was nice to meet him. Adele stared with wide eyes and offered a shy eye. Lysian told Adele he could call him Uncle Evan, and explained that he had helped Mom a lot since they were kids. Evan squeezed Adele's hand gently, reassuring him that he didn't have to be afraid, mentioning he had seen him running really fast earlier. Evan then asked if Adele wanted to play with him later, excitedly suggesting they could even get him a pony to ride. Adele's eyes lit up, and he exclaimed, "Wow, a pony." Lysian immediately panicked, demanding to know what this was about and worrying that Adele might get hurt. She waved her arms frantically, declaring absolutely not, at least not until he was 10. Evan held Adele's hand and relayed the message, telling him he could ride one when he was 10. Adele stared at his new honkel intently, then gripped Evan's coat and whispered a secret proposition. "If you let me ride a horse later." Evan leaned in to whisper back, grinning conspiratorially. He asked if Adele promised, and Adele agreed not to say a single word. Lysian asked what they were saying, but Evan simply smiled and claimed it was a secret, saying his hands were tied. Lysian sighed, thinking parenting was a thankless job. Suddenly, a voice cut through the air, saying, "Oh, there you all are." Lysian froze, recognizing the voice immediately. The crown prince approached, apologizing for his tardiness. Lysian thought to herself that he was finally here. She curtsied and greeted him as, "Your Highness." The prince looked at the group and asked who the child was, then welcomed Lady Rottweiler. Lysian formally introduced her son, telling Adele to say hello to the crown prince. Adele placed a hand on his chest and bowed perfectly, introducing himself as Edelweiss Rue from the Rottweiler family and saying it was a pleasure to make his acquaintance. The surrounding guests whispered excitedly, gossiping that she must have brought him specifically to meet his highness. The prince grinned, remarking on how bold the child was. He called Adele closer, saying he was adorable. Lysian nodded to her son, and Adele ran to the prince. The prince stared closely at the boy's face, commenting that seeing him up close, he looked like a bright child. Then, he dropped a bombshell remark. He claimed that Adele looked just like him, possessing his eyes and his nose. He turned to Lysian with a smile, asking, "Don't you think, Lady Rottweiler?" Lysian gritted her teeth, thinking internally how absurd the statement was. She observed that Adele's eyes and nose looked nothing like the prince's. She realized that the games had finally begun. The prince smiled sympathetically, noting that it must have been difficult for her to raise a child on her own. Lysian reminded herself to keep her wits about her to avoid getting tangled in his web. She thanked him for his concern. The prince stood from his desk, or rather, leaned in, explaining that since he was away from the capital during that time, he didn't know what she was going through. He grinned down at the boy and said that if he had known she had such a lovely son, he would have been there to support him earlier. He then knelt down to be at eye level with Adil. Lizin humbly replied that it was nothing and she was grateful for his kind words. The crown prince smiled, remarking that it seemed Adil was very blessed. He observed that the boy appeared to have her spirit, but added with a twitch of his eye that he also possessed a bright mind like his father. Lizin laughed nervously, commenting that Adil was like an angel, sometimes making her wonder if he was truly sent down by God. The prince agreed, stating he was indeed a lovely child and she must be proud. Seizing the moment to execute her plan, Lizin admitted that in many ways, she felt Adil took after his father more than her. She cast a deliberate glance toward Gray, who stood nearby appearing stoic. The prince followed her gaze, his expression hardening. Lysian continued, describing how Adil shared his father's mannerisms, such as the way he appeared lost in thought. Gray looked over at that moment, perfectly timing the act. The prince's smile became strained. He stated that he had wished to announce it officially and greet her with his partner, but noted that there had been a tragic loss in his partner's family, putting such joyful occasions on hold. He hoped she understood. Lizin replied that she saw and understood of course, visibly trembling with suppressed emotion. The prince abruptly stated that he shouldn't keep them and gave them permission to leave. Lizin thanked him for the invitation, adding that she was sure it was a great experience for Adil. She prompted her son to say goodbye. Adil beamed a bright smile and thanked the prince for inviting them. The prince turned away coldly, telling them they could go. As Lizin walked away, she heard Gray call her name. He approached, suggesting that if she was done, they should go eat, remembering that Adil needed food as well. Adil's eyes lit up at the mention of food. Gray looked at the boy and asked what he would like to eat, offering to have it prepared. He lifted Adil into his arms with ease. Adil looked amazed, asking if he really meant it. The prince watched from his desk as the three of them walked away together, looking for all the world like a perfect family. Once they were gone, his facade crumbled. He slammed his fist onto the table, his face twisted in rage as he muttered about how absurd it was. Later, at a dining table, Adil marveled at the feast before him. Gray ate silently while Lysian watched him. She thanked him quietly. Gray put down his silverware, remarking that while he wasn't complaining, he hadn't expected that from her. He asked what exactly she was thanking him for. Lysian simply replied, just everything. Gray stated that didn't make things any clearer but suggested they leave it at that. Suddenly, a voice shouted, "Uncle." Evan approached the table, pouting. He complained that Lysian was cruel, pointing out that he had told her he came to see her, yet she had left him alone. Lysian apologized, explaining there was something she had to do. Evan smiled, saying it was all right and he hadn't come for an apology. He then asked if he could stay with her family tonight, as there were a few things he hadn't been able to discuss with her yet. Lysian was surprised but agreed it would be fine. Evan sat down, saying, "Me too," and looked at Gray, asking if he was staying as well. Gray nodded. Lysian looked between them, asking if they had planned this and why they were acting this way. The two men simply glared at each other, leaving Lysian confused about the tension. The group returned to the Rottweiler estate in a carriage. The butler welcomed Lysian back. Evan stepped out holding a sleeping Adele, greeting the butler warmly. Lysian asked Evan if he could bring Adele to his room, directing him to the third door on the left with the drawings. Evan agreed and carried the boy upstairs. Lysian watched him go, thinking she was glad Evan was there since Adele was tired and needed someone to care for him. Turning to Gray, Lysian told him he should head to bed too and that the butler would show him to his room, admitting she was exhausted. Gray stared at her for a moment before calling her name. He reached out his hand. Lysian thought that carrying her would probably be nothing for him since he had easily carried two bears. Without a word, Gray scooped her up into his arms. Lysian blushed, startled. Gray scolded her gently, pointing out that she couldn't even walk properly so she shouldn't try. Gray calmly told him to stop yelling or he would wake everyone up. Lysian let out a shocked noise as Gray began to carry her up the stairs, thinking that despite the practicality, the situation felt a little strange. Gray carried Lysian up the stairs, his grip firm. He noticed that her feet were badly swollen from the evening's events. His expression darkened with a glare of concern, but when she looked up at him, he quickly softened his face into a gentle smile. Suddenly, Evan appeared, watching them with a strained expression. He asked what they were doing. Lysian explained that her feet were swollen. Evan immediately complained, asking why she hadn't told him so he could have carried her himself. He began to ramble, making excuses that he had been too busy taking care of Adil to notice, but promising that next time he would be the first to notice. Lysian, exhausted and in pain, cut him off and simply told him to open the door. The door creaked open, and Gray carried her inside, setting her down gently. Both men bid her good night, telling her to sleep well. Lysian waved them off, too tired to argue. Once the door clicked shut, she let out a heavy sigh. She flopped onto the bed, feeling as if she might die from exhaustion. She thought she was going to faint, but as she lay there, she realized that after everything that had happened that day, her mind was finally a little more at ease. She closed her eyes. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, the atmosphere was far darker. Crown Prince Therion sat on a sofa, his fingers scratching violently against the fabric. A maid knelt before him, trembling in fear. Therion muttered that Lysian was a sly fox of a woman. The terrified maid agreed with him. He tapped his finger on the armrest, musing that it would be a waste to discard her just because she was a pain. He grinned coldly, remarking that if you catch a fox, you don't eat its meat, though you can make a scarf from its fur. However, he decided it wasn't worth the time, and that was what made him furious. He ordered the maid to rise. As she stood up, he suddenly slapped her across the face. The maid fell to the floor, trembling violently. Therion shouted, asking if the position of crown princess wasn't enough for Lysian. He muttered to himself that he couldn't just refuse to give her the position either. He demanded the maid speak. She whispered a name, Count Garlic. A man stepped out of the shadows. It was Cicero Garlic. The prince asked how he could make Lysian the crown princess and then kick her out when he no longer needed her. Count Garlic bowed, promising that he would surely find a way. Satisfied, the prince dismissed him. Once alone, Therion stared out the window. He recalled the emperor's challenge: if he desired the throne, he had to prove he could take it. He remembered seeing Prince Roden standing beside the emperor. Therion slammed his fist onto the windowsill in a rage. He didn't understand why he had to go through such an unpleasant trial for a position that was rightfully his, but he resolved to jump through their hoops. He vowed to take down Roden while he was under the emperor's protection, and first, he would hunt down that fox, Lysian. The next day, the sun shone brightly. Adele marveled at the blue sky as he walked down the street with Lysian. She told him they were going to a place that sold the cakes he loved. They arrived at a fancy bakery filled with sparkling treats. Adele was amazed by a pink chocolate fountain. Lysian explained what it was and promised to get him some later. Lysian looked around, wondering where their companion was. She spotted Gray approaching and called him over. Gray arrived, looking sharp in a suit. He asked if she had ordered and commented that she looked a little thin. Suddenly, Adele let out a whimper and burst into tears. Lysian panicked, asking if he was okay. Adele sniffled and apologized to his mama. Lysian comforted him, saying it was okay and they should get him cleaned up. Gray reached out and gently wiped the child's face with a handkerchief. Lysian's eyes widened as she noticed the embroidery on the cloth. She asked Gray about it. He confirmed it was a dothberry flower. Lysian stared at it, confused by the specific detail. A waiter at the bakery suddenly stumbled and fell. Lysian gasped, rushing forward to ask if he was all right. She offered him her handkerchief, telling him that he and his husband could use it. Lysian stammered, flustered by the assumption that Gray was her husband. This comment triggered a vivid memory for Gray. He recalled the estate where Lysian's coming-of-age party was hosted 5 years ago. He remembered waking up the day after the party, naked in a strange bed, feeling hazy as if he had taken something strong. He had wondered what he had gotten himself into. On the floor, he had spotted a handkerchief embroidered with a red dothberry flower, an item that clearly belonged to a woman. He remembered scrambling to put on his clothes before being hurried out by an attendant. At the time, he hadn't processed it, but now he realized that if he had indeed spent that night with Lysian, the implications were massive. Back in the present, the waiter asked if he should leave the handkerchief with her husband. Adele quickly stepped in, reaching out and saying he would take it. The waiter handed it over, complimenting the young lord on his cleverness. Lysian snapped out of her daze, chiding herself for getting distracted by silly thoughts just because the waiter assumed they were a married couple with a child. Lysian's mood dipped as she thought about her title. She realized she had forgotten that the nobility always called her Lady Rottweiler, ironically mocking her for having a child out of wedlock. She thought bitterly that she had never desired to be known as someone's wife anyway. Gray seemed to sense her shift in mood. He gently told her not to take it to heart. Lysian looked at him in surprise. Gray assured her that he knew what she was feeling, but she just had to wait, expressing certainty that would come to her. Lysian wondered internally when that would be and how long she had to wait for this mysterious man, unaware that Gray was wrestling with his own suspicions. They decided to just have cake. As they ate, Lysian asked Adele how it was, and he happily replied it was good. Gray watched the boy intensely. His thoughts turned to his family's secrets. He reflected on the Doberman bloodline, noting that their innate talents were exceptional. He thought about how his family lived an ascetic life to keep those abilities contained and strictly protected their bloodline. A rigid family rule dictated that they must never separate from their partner and must raise any children together. Gray resolved that if it was confirmed he was Adele's father, he would do whatever it took to fulfill his responsibility. He stared at the empty plates, wishing he could know for sure. After the meal, they prepared to leave. Lysian thanked Gray for everything. As they stood outside, Lysian asked to hold Adele, but the boy hesitated. He reached for Gray instead, saying he wanted to go with him. Gray looked surprised but asked if there was a reason he couldn't. Lysian admitted there wasn't, but she felt Gray was acting strangely today. The carriage ride back was quiet. After dropping them off, Gray sat alone in his carriage, waving goodbye to Lysian and Adele. His expression turned serious as he thought that just because he believed he was right didn't mean he could act yet. He decided it was too dangerous to check their biological connection right now, and that he shouldn't be holding Adele in his arms until he could protect them. Thunder cracked as Gray arrived at the Doberman estate. The atmosphere gloomy and imposing. He walked down the long red carpeted hall to meet his mother. He asked how the preparations were going. His mother, standing beneath a portrait of the late Duke, replied that they were going well. Her face was stern as she told him that he must find him. She reminded Gray that he was now the Duke of the Doberman family and that he must lead this household. Gray clenched his fist at his side, his knuckles turning white. He vowed to his mother that he would find the man who poisoned his father, asking her to give him some time. His mother sighed, her expression a mix of grief and steely resolve. She lamented that the late Duke should not have left them like this, but she declared she would not let the matter slide. She told Gray she was putting her faith in him. Gray walked away, reassuring her not to worry. He approached the grand double doors of the Duke's office, a room that could only be entered freely by the current head of the house. He raised a key, the metal clicking in the lock, and pushed the heavy doors open. The room was chilly. Gray walked to the desk, running his hand over the surface where his father had passed away. He recalled that they had announced to the public that the Duke died from heart failure due to overwork, but the actual cause was poison. Gray found this incredibly strange. He reflected on the Doberman family history, noting that they had always been trained to avoid threats of death. To stand at the very top, descendants pushed themselves to their limits, drinking small amounts of poison to build up a tolerance. Just like Gray, his father should have been immune. Gray realized this meant the poison used was one their family did not know of. Furthermore, the culprit had to be on close terms with the Duke to slip it to someone always on high alert. He reasoned that it was rare to find someone capable of masterminding such a plan. His mind turned to the royal family. He questioned why they would attack the Dobermans, who had pledged loyalty as faithful watchdogs for generations. He concluded there was no reason for the emperor to kill his father now. He considered Prince Rodin next. Although young, Rodin had an exceptional mind, but Gray figured he would know there was no benefit to killing a neutral power. Gray gripped the chair, his eyes narrowing as he settled on the only remaining suspect, Crown Prince Therion. He visualized the prince holding a snake, his intuition screaming that the greedy man wished to get rid of the Dobermans. Gray called out sharply for his butler. When the servant entered, Gray issued a specific and unusual order. He wanted every single member of the staff, from stablemen to gardeners, to bring him tea every day in the morning, afternoon, and evening. He understood that if the prince wanted him dead, he would likely try to poison him next. Gray decided to see if he could move that plan along, resolving to wait for the attempt. The scene shifted to the Rottweiler estate, flashing back to the previous morning. Lijun lay in bed, her hair spread across the pillow. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange about Gray. She struggled to pinpoint exactly what it was, but noted that as her best friend for years, it wasn't easy for him to hide things from her. She wondered what he was concealing. Her thoughts drifted to his denial of being the father, yet she couldn't forget his cryptic words in the forest. She wished there were some physical similarity between Gray and Adele so she could bring it up to him, but she just didn't know. A maid knocked and entered, announcing that Lijun had a guest, the Baron of the Husky household. Lijun was surprised by the early hour. The maid explained she had escorted him to the sitting room as he hadn't had breakfast yet. Lijun wondered why Even had been visiting so often lately. She told the maid she would be down shortly and asked for food to be prepared. As she got ready, Lizian thought about Adele. He had been alone so often, and she felt relieved that he wouldn't be as lonely now. She decided that while she couldn't allow horseback riding, they could perhaps walk around the garden. Lizian walked down the stairs to find Evan waiting. He greeted her with a bright, "Good morning, Lizian." Lijun started to return the greeting but stopped in surprise when she saw Edel dangling playfully from Evan's arm. Edel beamed at her, asking if she slept well. He excitedly told her he had been playing with Uncle. Evan laughed, explaining that he found out Edel was there and came right down. Watching them together, Lijun recalled hearing that children could sense the nature of people, and seeing Edel so comfortable with Ivan, she guessed it must be true. Lijun extended her hand to Edel, telling him to come along so they could eat. Edel cheerfully agreed, grabbing her hand. Evan joined them, chiming in that he was coming too. As they walked together, Edel smiled brightly, holding Lijun's hand. Lijun watched him, thinking to herself that the scene really made it feel like they were a family. She wondered why she was suddenly getting choked up. At the breakfast table, Ivan munched on a piece of bread. Lizian asked why he was there so early. Ivan replied simply that he just wanted to spend time with her. He took another bite, adding that she had been so busy working lately that he just came to see her. Lizian thanked him for worrying about her. Her mind drifted to the past. She recalled that Evan used to be a very reliable guard for her. They had roamed the alleyways and streets together like it was their home. However, she reminded herself that she couldn't keep living such a wild life. She wasn't that carefree girl anymore. She had chosen to be Adele's guardian and couldn't go back to that time. Ivan interrupted her thoughts, saying he could guess what she was thinking, but that wasn't what he meant. He asked her to guess something she really enjoyed. When Lijun looked confused, he told her to look into the deepest parts of her heart. As she stared at him intensely, he revealed 2 tickets with a grin, announcing, "Skeet shooting." Lijun realized she had completely forgotten about that. Adele asked what skeet shooting was. Lijun explained it was shooting at targets in the sky, reminding him of the guns she had told him about, the Grande and the Etoile. She described it as shooting and catching pigeons. Adele's eyes sparkled and he excitedly said he wanted to watch her shoot a gun. Lijun hesitated, admitting she didn't really want Adele to see that. Evan countered, arguing that Adele was 5 years old and grown up enough to catch a boar. He told Lijun not to be overprotective, pointing out how much the boy wanted to go. He added that since the Rottweilers played with guns for a living, Adele had to learn eventually anyway. Evan proposed a compromise: give Adele an unloaded gun and watch what he does, just to let him get used to it. Lizian thought about it and agreed he was right. However, she decided it was still too dangerous to bring Adele to the shooting grounds. Instead, she offered to teach him for an hour each day at home. Adele happily agreed. Even cleared his throat loudly. He pointed out that this meant the two of them, he and Lizian, would be going to the shooting grounds alone, and she couldn't back out now. Lizian smiled, conceding that she did buy the passes after all. Evan grinned, saying he couldn't miss out on a royal arena. He mentioned that Casper had worked hard to get the passes. When Lizian asked who that was, Evan explained he was the vice captain of the Slay mercenaries who worked under him. Lizian asked him to pass on her thanks. The scene shifted to the outdoors. Birds flapped their wings as Lizian and Evan arrived at the shooting range. Evan noticed Lizian looking around and asked if something was wrong. Lizian replied that it was just strange being there after so long, though the landscape was still beautiful. Internally, Lizian reflected on her past. She thought that back then, she never would have imagined she'd have a daughter. A memory surfaced of her younger self holding a shotgun, excitedly telling her father she had hit another target and asking if she could become a marksman. Her father had patted her head, laughing and saying she would bring glory to the Rottweilers one day. Lizian thought sadly that she had been so innocent then, simply enjoying the recognition, but now things were different. Evan called her name, jolting her from her reverie. He asked if they should start with the plates. They walked over to a table laid out with various firearms. Evan asked what she wanted to use. Lizian suggested the e-toil, reasoning that the Grandy's firepower was too strong for clay target shooting. Evan picked up a heavier shotgun, noting that the e-toil was the lightest gun available and warning her that her wrist might give out if she tried to carry the heavier ones. He reached for the gun on the table. As his hand brushed near hers, Lizian flinched, wondering why it felt so intense. She looked at him, realizing that Evan had grown a lot. Evan racked the slide of the shotgun with a loud clack. He stated that he wasn't a child anymore and asked if he should start. He told her to watch closely. As he posed with the gun resting on his shoulder, looking back at her with a confident smile, Lizian found herself thinking, when did he get so handsome? Lizian watched as the birds scattered into the sky, her gaze fixed on Evan's back. His short hair fluttered in the wind, and she noted that his sturdy frame had truly become that of a man. He had always looked young to her, but before she knew it, he had grown enough to aid in the war by providing his own army of mercenaries. Seeing him handle the rifle with such ease made him seem like a completely different person to her. Evan suddenly called out to Lizian, snapping her out of her thoughts, and told her it was her turn. As she stepped forward, she felt a jolt of nervousness. She raised the rifle, aiming carefully, but her mind was elsewhere. She told herself that just because he had grown, it didn't mean she had feelings for him now. She resolved that she couldn't blindly accept his affection, as if she were running away from something. She needed to know the truth about Idil's father and stand proud. Because of that, she decided she couldn't depend on Evan's kindness as much as she wanted to. Determined to let the momentary fluttering of her heart pass, she fired the gun with a loud bang. Evan whistled impressively, admitting that he could never beat her. He joked that he could never beat a Rottweiler in a gun duel, but he acknowledged that she truly had a natural talent. Lizian laughed it off, agreeing with him, but as she turned to leave, Evan suddenly asked her to wait. Before she could react, Evan leaned his head gently against her shoulder. Lizian froze, asking him what he was doing. Evan murmured that she smelled like gunpowder, and he liked that she smelled different from everyone else. He asked if he could stay like that for just a little longer, noting that he wouldn't have many opportunities to do this anymore. Flustered, Lizian told him he was being embarrassing and asked why he was going around smelling people like an animal. Evan simply smiled and reminded her that she shouldn't be surprised, as she was his owner. Lizian's heart gave a painful throb. Evan continued, stating that his promise still stood and that he was completely serious about it. Unable to handle the proximity, Lizian pushed him away firmly, telling him to stop. She declared that she had made up her mind to look for Adele's father and didn't think it was right to accept his feelings given the situation. She told Evan that he should be with someone who made him happy. Evan sighed, calling her a fool. He smiled warmly and told her that Ashiv made him happy and that he was always looking at her anyway. He declared that no matter where she went, he would follow because she owned him. He added that a tamed beast was only happy at its owner's side. Looking back on it, Lizian thought she should have rejected him again right then. But when he smiled at her so sweetly with his gray eyes, she found herself unable to say a thing, feeling as if she were under a spell. Later, as they rode in the carriage back to the city, Evan broke the silence by calling her name. Lizian jolted in surprise. Evan informed her that Adele wanted to go on a picnic. Lizian was shocked, asking if Adele had really said that. Evan confirmed it, explaining that the boy wanted to go to the forest with the baby bear. He mentioned that Adele had told him this morning, likely feeling adventurous after having a great time at the banquet on the day of the hunt. Evan suggested that the three of them go to the Revet forest nearby. He reasoned that there weren't any dangerous beasts there, only squirrels, pheasants and rabbits, and noted that Lizian knew the area best. Lizian realized that Adele was probably full of curiosity after the banquet. Evan remarked that although Adele wasn't quite as bold as Lizian was as a child, the boy was far from meek. He expressed his desire for the child to experience the world as much as possible. Lizian felt a pang of sadness that she had to find this out through someone else rather than her son telling her directly. But she agreed to the plan. She asked Evan if he would be their escort, and he cheerfully agreed. When the carriage arrived at her destination, Evan promised not to take his eyes off the boy. He told her he would come to get the two of them the next day. As he stood outside the carriage, he wished her a good sleep and waved goodbye enthusiastically. Lizzie watched him from the window, sighing softly but then smiling as she thought about the picnic. She wondered how long it had been since she went on one and decided she needed to hurry back and tell Adele the news. The next day, at the Rottweiler estate, the preparations were underway. A maid approached Lizzie presenting a picnic basket that had a little bit of everything prepared for their trip. Lizzie thanked her. Suddenly, Adele's voice rang out, shouting that he was all ready. Lizzie turned around to see her son dashing down the stairs. He was dressed in a charming light blue suit with gold trim and a bow tie. He beamed at her, asking what she thought of his outfit. Lizzie was instantly overwhelmed. She mentally punched the air, screaming internally about how incredibly cute he looked, her heart melting at the sight of her son. Lizzie smiled down at her son, telling Adele that he looked great and suggesting they head out. Adele agreed cheerfully, but as they turned to leave, Lizzie hummed in surprise, noticing someone familiar further down the hallway. It was Gray, standing with a maid. Lizzie called out his name, surprised to see him. Gray turned, his expression calm as always. Lizzie asked what he was doing there, noting that he hadn't told her he was coming. Gray explained that he had something to discuss with the young lord of the Rottweiler family. Her brother. Lizzie pointed out that her brother should be in his office on the second floor. Gray then looked at their attire and asked if the two of them were going somewhere. Lizzie brightened up and explained that they were going on a picnic to Revet Forest with Adele. She added that Evan had offered to escort them. At the mention of Ivan, specifically the Baron of the Husky household, Gray's eye twitched visibly. Lizzie confirmed it, confused by the strange face he was making. Suddenly, Gray told her to give him one moment. He stated he would be right back after speaking to her brother. Lizzie was bewildered, asking why and if he intended to come with them, but Gray simply walked away, muttering for her to wait and promising to be back soon. Left in the hallway, Lizzie looked confused. Adele tugged on her dress and suggested they wait, shrewdly guessing that Lord Doberman wanted to go on the picnic with them. Lizzie patted Adele's head affectionately, asking with a smile who had taught him to be so grown up. Adele just giggled. Moments later, Evan arrived, looking sharp in a dark suit. He called out to them, greeting Adele enthusiastically and telling the boy to look at himself. Evan then proudly presented a massive picnic basket he had brought, asking if he wasn't the best. The basket was overflowing with croissants, fruits, and desserts. Lizzie stared at the mountain of food, asking what all of this was. Evan cheerfully replied that it was food for them to eat, insisting they needed to eat a lot to keep up their energy. Lizzie thought to herself that they were just going on a simple picnic and wondered if they really needed that much, though she noted Evan seemed very excited. Internally, however, she worried. She knew Evan and Gray weren't on very good terms and wondered if Evan would be upset when he found out Gray wanted to come too. Just then, Adele approached Evan with sparkling eyes. He announced he had something to ask Uncle Evan. Evan smiled warmly, asking what it was. Adele declared that he wanted Lord Doberman to come too, asking if that was okay because he liked it when everyone was together. Evan's smile froze. A visible crack appeared in his composure as he processed the request. He stood paralyzed for a moment before the shock caused him to drop the heavy picnic baskets onto the floor with a loud thud. Sweating profusely and forcing a strained smile, Evan told Adele sure, though he struggled to say Lord Doberman's name. Lizzie realized this was her chance to bring Gray along without making it awkward. She explained to Evan that Gray had arrived a moment ago to see her brother, and then checked with Adele one more time to make sure he really wanted the Duke to come. Adele beamed and said yes. Defeated by the child's cuteness, Evan sighed and admitted that since Adele wanted it, they had to agree. Lizzie whispered to Evan that they had no choice since the picnic was for Adele, suggesting he just think of Gray as another escort. Evan grimaced but agreed for the boy's sake. Evan then asked where the bear was. Lizzie pointed out that it was ready to go, held by a maid. Just then, Gray returned. Lizzie told him his timing was perfect and asked him to take care of the bear for them, as they had no more free hands. Gray stared at the small bear, and the bear stared back. He sniffed it curiously. Evan greeted Gray stiffly, noting it had been a while. Gray returned the sentiment with equal coldness, sparks of tension flying between the two men. Lizzie sighed internally, unable to understand why their relationship seemed to worsen by the day. Gray turned, holding the bear securely, and said, "Let's go." Lizzie asked Adele if he was excited. The boy held her hand tightly, exclaiming that he couldn't wait. The group set off. As they walked through the woods, Adele asked how much longer it would be. Lizzie assured him they were almost there. It was a strange sight, the Duke carrying a baby bear, and the Baron lugging two heavy picnic baskets, walking side by side behind Lizzie and her son. Evan scanned the area and pushed aside some branches, announcing he had found the spot. As they stepped into the clearing, a gust of wind blew petals around them. Lizzie was awestruck, admitting she didn't know such a beautiful place existed there. Adele pointed excitedly at a patch of white flowers, telling his mother they were as snow, white and beautiful as she was. Lizzie smiled, explaining they were snow roses. She suggested they look at them from where they were instead of picking them. Gray added quietly that flowers were prettiest when they were where they belonged. The baby bear huffed and pawed at Gray's chest. Gray gently placed the animal down on the ground. Lizzie stretched, groaning slightly that her back hurt from constantly bending over to talk to Adele. Even called out to her, inviting her to sit on the blanket he had laid out. Lysian thanked him, asking when he had prepared all of this. Evan brushed it off as nothing. He then rustled through the basket and produced a cupcake. With a bright smile, he offered it to her, proudly stating that he used a lot of cream so it should taste good. Lysian beamed at the cupcake in her hand, exclaiming that it looked great and thanking Evan for the treat. However, the sweet moment was interrupted as Gray leaned in close, his face inches from theirs, and calmly asked Evan to give him one too. Evan immediately pulled back, clutching the cupcake protectively. He stammered, asking what Gray would do if he didn't want to share, insisting that he had made them specifically for Lysian and Adil. Lysian sighed, remarking that such behavior was awfully petty for a baron. Evan shot back that all soldiers were mean and petty, and when Lysian pointed out his title again, he stubbornly declared, once a soldier, always a soldier. Gray ignored the bickering and asked Evan to hand him a knife. Confused but compliant, Evan handed it over. Gray took the cupcake and sliced it neatly. To everyone's surprise, he offered the first piece to Evan, telling him it was his reward since he had done a lot of work today. Evan chuckled, looking pleased. Gray then called out to Adil. The boy zoomed over, clutching the baby bear. Adil's eyes lit up, and he shouted a big thank you to Uncle Evan. Evan scratched his head, blushing and laughing, telling Adil to eat a lot so he could grow big and strong. Gray then handed a piece to Lysian. Evan's mood instantly shifted back to irritation. He demanded to know why Gray was giving it all away, arguing that if he was going to hand them out, he should give them to him since he could eat them all. He asked if Gray was really going to do this in front of a starving man. Ignoring the outburst, Gray took a bite of the cupcake. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and his eyes sparkled as he admitted that the cupcake was delicious. Evan let out a triumphant "ha" and puffed up with pride, though he tried to look nonchalant. Lysian laughed at his antics, asking what was with him today and telling him he was seriously hilarious. She then offered them sandwiches that her maid had packed, pointing out the crab sandwiches specifically for Gray, knowing he loved them. Gray ate one, murmuring his approval. Lysian then handed a sandwich to Evan, telling him she had asked the maid to make it with broccoli specifically for him since he liked it. Evan pouted, turning his head away and muttering that he didn't need it. Lysian sighed and told him to just take it. Evan held the sandwich but didn't eat it, grumbling that his arm was going to fall off if he had to keep holding it like that. Eventually, he caved, saying fine, he would eat it. Lysian watched him, wondering why he was being such a baby. Turning her attention to her son, Lysian gave Adil a pot of honey as a snack for the baby bear, instructing him to give it a little at a time. Adil cheerfully agreed and dashed off with Mamong, the bear, to have their snack. Lysian watched them go, noting that Adil seemed to be getting along well with the animal. She explained that Mamong was the name of the little sister character from Adil's favorite fairy tale. As she watched her son feed the bear, she wondered aloud if Adil wanted a little brother or sister. A gentle breeze blew through the trees, scattering petals around them. Lysian smiled softly, thinking that spending time with people she cared about like this was truly nice. Evan noticed her expression and asked if she really thought so. He asked if she thought it was a good idea to come. Lysian looked at him and agreed wholeheartedly, saying she was glad they came. A few days later, the scene shifted to the Grand Doberman estate. Gray stood in his office, looking out the window. His butler bowed and confirmed that today was the last day of the interviews. Gray asked who was scheduled to come in. The butler listed Tom, the stable hand, in the morning, Gail, the kitchen maid, in the afternoon, and Leilai, the maid who swept the stairs at night. Gray dismissed the butler. Once alone, his expression darkened. It had been almost a month since he ordered every staff member to bring him tea daily. It was a trap set under the guise of meeting his new household staff, but in reality, he was hunting for the person who had poisoned his father. He clenched his fist, thinking that no one had taken the bait yet, and he was starting to run out of time. Suddenly, the door opened. A voice announced that he had brought the tea. Gray ordered him to come in. An older man with a thick beard entered, introducing himself as Tom, the stable hand. Gray instructed him to set the tea on the table. As Tom poured the tea, he spoke with emotion, admitting he never thought the day would come when he would prepare tea for the Duke. He said he couldn't be more honored. Tom began to reminisce about the past, recalling a time when he was just a starving beggar on the streets. He reminded Gray that he had been only 10 years old back then, yet he had reached out his hand to save him. Tom declared that he always kept that grace in mind and worked hard to repay the kindness. Gray listened quietly, his sharp eyes analyzing the man. He told Tom that it was a nice mindset to have and dismissed him. As the stable hand left the room, Gray watched him go, his internal thought confirming that it definitely wasn't him. Gray sat in his office, the click of the door latch echoing in the silence. He thought to himself that whoever the traitor was, they were like a shadow. Not a single member of the staff he had interviewed seemed like a traitor. He gazed up at the portrait of his late father hanging on the wall, lamenting that it had been quite some time since his father passed away, yet he still didn't have any concrete evidence. He took a sip of his tea, the clink of the cup against the saucer sharp in the quiet room, and realized he had no choice but to wait a little longer. Time passed, and the seasons shifted. The leaves began to fall, and soon, snow started to gather on the rooftops. One evening, Gray sat slumped in his chair, his body aching and his eyes feeling dry. He reflected that now that he was the Duke, there was so much more work to be done. He recalled hearing that the young lord of the Rottweiler family had hired an aide recently and considered getting one himself, though he noted with a sigh that hiring someone was work in itself. He wondered if he could get a recommendation from someone. A knock sounded at the door. A young maid entered, pushing a tea cart. She stammered nervously, asking for pardon and introducing herself as the one who had prepared his tea. Gray thanked her and told her she could leave it there. As she turned to go, Gray observed her. A shy young maid with long braided hair. He decided to try a different approach with her and asked for her name. Startled, she replied that her name was Lilai and that she was responsible for sweeping the stairs. She trembled visibly under his gaze. Gray reached out and suddenly grasped her hand, noting how rough it felt. He asked if her work was the reason her hands were so rough, questioning if such labor wasn't awfully demanding at such a young age. Layli blushed furiously, her heart pounding. She stammered that it was quite all right, then panicked and apologized. She snatched her hand back from his grip, bowing hastily. She said she ought to go back to work and wished him a pleasant evening before dashing out of the room. Gray watched the door close, left alone with more questions than answers. Meanwhile, at the Rottweiler estate, the household was preparing for winter. Snow covered the grounds outside. Inside, Adele stood before a dartboard, squinting intensely. Lysian advised him to take his time and not be impatient, instructing him to keep looking at what was in his hand until the very end. Adele threw the dart with Afwish, and it hit the board with a clack. But far from the center. The boy complained that darts were too hard, reminding his mother that she had promised to teach him since it was too cold to go outside. Lysian encouraged him, telling him he could do it and suggesting he try pushing more with his elbow next time. Adele pouted, letting out a frustrated "Heemph." Lysian chuckled to herself, thinking it was actually a relief that Adele was no good at this. She clenched her dress, thinking that she didn't want to force him into anything, just because he was a Rottweiler. It might be selfish, she thought, but she wanted her child to stay as far away from guns as possible, preferring for him to hold a quill like her brother. Just then, a maid approached Lysian with a letter, urging her to look at it. She explained it was an invitation from the palace, noting how rare it was for such a thing to come at this time of year. Lysian took the envelope, which bore the royal seal, wondering what it was for. She opened it and read that it was an invitation regarding a banquet the crown prince was holding to celebrate the year's end. The letter explained that the formal ball would happen later in the year, but this was a casual gathering where he encouraged young nobles to join. Lysian realized immediately what this was. She saw through the guise, knowing he was definitely trying to use Adele while posing as a generous prince who cared for children. She crumpled the letter in her fist, calling him a hypocrite. Determined, Lysian ordered her maid to prepare a carriage right away, stating there was somewhere she needed to go. The maid looked confused, asking where. Lysian declared she would need clothes for the ball, and it wouldn't be enough to be dressed by her maids. She told the maid to do her a favor and call Madame Chartreux. Soon after, Madame Chartreux arrived at the estate. The famous dressmaker stepped out of the carriage, adjusting her glasses. She was dressed in an elegant teal gown. Lysian greeted her warmly, saying she had been waiting. Madame Chartreux bowed, saying it was a pleasure to meet Lady Rottweiler and an honor to meet the woman of the hour. Lysian replied that the honor was hers. As Madame Chartreux's reputation preceded her, Madame Chartreux looked around, her expression serious behind her glasses. Lysian expressed her gratitude that the person directly responsible for dressing the Empress had accepted her humble invitation. Madame Chartreux took Lysian's hand, stating she was grateful for the invitation. As they headed upstairs, Lysian wondered if this meant she had passed the first test, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something felt a little off. In the fitting room, Madame Chartreux asked to take Lysian's measurements first, explaining it was the first step in making a beautiful dress. Her expression remained stern as she focused on her work, telling Lysian it would just take a moment. Lysian stood still, feeling nervous for some reason she couldn't quite place. Madame Chartreux measured her with a tape measure, instructing her not to move yet. Finally, she finished, thanking Lysian and telling her that would be all for today. Lysian stepped down from the platform, thanking the Madame. Lysian suggested they go downstairs to have a cup of tea, thinking to herself that the dressmaker was bolder than she had anticipated. However, as they sat in the parlor, Madame Chartreux abruptly set her cup down with a sharp clink. She apologized, noting that they had been drinking tea for quite some time, and stated she wanted to discuss the dress. Then, Madame Chartreux dropped a bombshell. With all due respect, she announced that she believed she would be unable to make Lysian's dress. Lysian was taken aback, demanding to know what she meant. Madame Chartreux decided to be perfectly candid. She bluntly stated that Lysian was simply not her type. She explained that so far, she had only made dresses for feminine ladies with flowing, golden angel-like hair and bodies so petite they looked like they could snap in two. Women who were practically born to wear dresses. Madame Chartreux stood up, becoming agitated as she critiqued Lysian's appearance. She pointed out that Lysian didn't match any of her preferences. She was sharp where others were curved, she wasn't petite, and her hair was too dark. Lysian, offended and confused, asked if that was really the reason. Chartreux insisted that inspiration came before all else in her line of work. Lysian refused to accept this, arguing that someone who had prepared countless wedding dresses for royals and even dressed the Empress couldn't possibly refuse a commission for such frivolous reasons. Chartreux countered, asking if Lysian would really be able to accept a different reason if she gave one. She pointed out that Lysian should be well aware of the rumors surrounding her. She admitted that she didn't wish to be part of those rumors, asking if that was a more believable reason. Just then, the door creaked open. Edel peeked in, calling for his mother. Madame Chartrix froze, her eyes widening behind her glasses as she looked at the child. Lijin asked Edel what was wrong. Edel explained that he had been playing with his bear, Momong, when he lost his favorite lily button. Madame Chartrix stared at the boy, realizing he was Lijin's son. Her expression softened into something painful. She told Edel it was all right if they couldn't find it, and offered to buy him a new one, but then she stopped herself. She asked Lijin for a moment alone with the guest, but requested Edel wait outside for a little while. Edel cheerfully agreed and dashed out. Once the door closed, Madame Chartrix's demeanor shifted completely. She apologized, explaining that seeing the two of them had brought back old memories because her own son had been a similar age. She recounted how her son used to love playing outside. One day, his button fell off while playing with a friend, and he had asked her to find it for him. At the time, Chartrix explained, she was busy making the previous Empress's New Year dress. She was on edge and had snapped at him. Something she now regretted deeply as a parent. She imagined he didn't want to bother her further, so he went out alone to look for the button. While doing so, he failed to see an approaching carriage. The memory was painful. Chartrix revealed that she only heard the news the next day. In the end, she lamented. A mother who only cared about her reputation had lost her own child. She looked at Lijin with new respect, noting that Lijin was not like her. She had seen how Lijin tended to her child without any hesitation. Chartrix sighed, apologizing for rambling and admitting she was usually as sharp as a knife about her work, but she felt a bit more lenient today. She asked if Lijin understood why she was saying this. Lizian smiled warmly and said she would like to continue what she was saying earlier. She formally asked Madame Chartrix to allow her to wear one of her dresses. Lizian declared that she wanted to attend the banquet in a dress that would outshine all others. Madame Chartrix grinned, her passion returning. She agreed, saying they should make that happen. As they left the estate, Edel waved goodbye to the dressmaker, telling her to come back soon. Chartrix smiled back before departing. Lijin's maid asked if she was sure it was all right to leave the dress to someone so eccentric. Lijin reassured her, saying that while the woman was eccentric, she didn't seem irresponsible. She then took Edel's hand and told him they should go find his button together. 1 week later, at the Rottweiler estate, the atmosphere was tense. Lizian and her maid sat in the parlor, worrying. There wasn't much time left before the ball, and they hadn't heard from Madame Chartrix, aside from a message saying she was almost finished. The maid worried they were pushing it too close to the deadline. Suddenly, the doors slammed open. Madame Chartrix burst in, looking exhausted but triumphant, telling them to put their worries to rest. She announced she had come to deliver the completed outfit. Lijin gasped, noting that the dressmaker looked unwell. Chartrix chuckled weakly, admitting she had overexerted herself a bit to meet the deadline. However, she had created a dress that would satisfy the request. She presented the garment, saying all that was left was for Lijin to try it on. Lijin thanked her profusely. Chartrix asked for assistance in helping Lijin change, noting that Edel would also need help with his outfit. As Lizian and the maids moved to prepare, Chartrix stumbled slightly, admitting she felt a little faint from the long nights and asked to take a seat. The maids gasped in delight as the curtain was pulled back, exclaiming that Lijin looked wonderful, like a goddess. They praised Madame Chartrix for her work. Lijin, looking at her reflection in the tall mirror, asked skeptically if it was really that beautiful, noting that all she had done was change her clothes. The maids urged her to come closer. Lijin turned to face her mother, asking if she really looked that different. Her mother beamed, telling her she looked so beautiful that they might as well start the festivities now. Madame Chartrix chuckled, noting she still had her touch. Madame Chartrix then presented a small box to Lijin. Inside lay a stunning necklace with teardrop yellow gems. She explained that she chose it because she felt Lizin's neckline looked a little bare and the color matched her golden eyes. Lijin was touched by the thought. Chartrix asked her to consider it a token of apology for her rudeness when they first met and wished her the best of luck for the ball tomorrow. Lijin thanked her warmly. Later, Lijin stood with her mother. Her mother acknowledged that Lijin had been through a lot because of her. Lijin smiled confidently, admitting she was sure she had brought down the family name for various reasons in the past. But she declared that she was wearing this dress to ensure none of those people would have anything bad to say at the ball. The group then cheered, deciding to go see how good Adele looked in his outfit. The scene shifted to the palace's year-end ball. It was an informal event but still hosted by the royal family, drawing nobility from far and wide under a magnificent chandelier. Guests whispered and glanced sideways, like wolves in sheep's clothing. Lijin arrived with Adele. She thought to herself that while she might have been the talk of the town lately, today would be different. She vowed to make sure no one had a single word to say against her. As she walked in, she noticed the gazes felt different this time. Instead of tearing her to pieces, they were admiring. She credited Madame Chartrix's dress for doing its job. She smirked internally, challenging them to be jealous. She observed the well-known families present, spotting Lise de Poodle, Welsh El Corgi, and the tall daughter of Duke Samoyed. Then, she froze, spotting Lady Snow Maltese, noting that she looked just like a doll as always. Suddenly, the announcer heralded the arrival of Crown Prince Therion Kun Helios and Prince Rodenburg Helios. The two princes walked down the red carpet. Therion smirked, wishing everyone a good evening. Lijin instinctively grabbed Adil's shoulder, pulling him close. Therion glanced in their direction. Lizian panicked internally, wondering if he was coming her way. She didn't want to be singled out as his first dance partner. She realized she hadn't found Gray yet and couldn't refuse a dance without a good reason. But accepting would mean leaving Adele alone. Just then, a hand was raised. It was Prince Roden. He asked Lady Maltese if he could have the dance. Lizian let out a confused, huh, as Lady Maltese accepted, saying the honor would be all hers. Lizian watched in shock, wondering if she had been completely mistaken about Theron's intentions to use Adele, or if he had simply thrown the banquet to strengthen relationships. Her thoughts were interrupted when someone said, "Excuse me." She looked down to see Prince Roden standing before her. He greeted her, noting they hadn't met, and asked for her name. Lizian introduced herself as Lizian Visha Rottweiler, saying it was an honor. She thought to herself that he was well-mannered and cute, completely different from the crown prince despite being from the same household. She recalled he turned 15 this year and noted he was more mature than she expected. Roden smiled apologetically, asking for forgiveness for not recognizing her eyes, explaining it was his first time attending a ball like this. He then noticed Adele peeking out from behind Lizian's dress. He asked if this was her child and invited Adele to say hello. Adele stepped forward and introduced himself as Edelweiss Rue Rottweiler. Roden complimented him, saying he was young but brave, as expected of a Rottweiler. Roden then pointed out that the other young nobles were playing nearby and asked if it would be alright if he joined them with a deal. Adele looked up at his mother, asking if that was okay. Lizian hesitated but agreed, saying if he was with His Highness, it should be fine. Roden squeezed Adele's hand and assured her not to worry, promising to take good care of her son. Lizian watched as Adele walked away with Prince Roden, her heart heavy with worry. She knew Adele hadn't made any friends before, but she tried to reassure herself that His Highness had promised to take care of him. She noted that the prince seemed smart and didn't appear to have any ulterior motives. Sighing, she told herself this wasn't the time to be worrying about her child and decided to join the party. As she walked through the ballroom, the whispers and stares followed her. The music played softly in the background, accompanied by the chatter of the guests. Lizian scanned the room, looking for Lady Welsh or Lady Lies, thinking they were the most interesting people at the banquet and wondering where they had gone. She overheard snippets of conversation. Two noblewomen were gossiping about Baron Secreto and Lady Bruni, laughing about rumors that they had been meeting in secret. One remarked that Secreto was the young man who had married recently, criticizing his wife for not looking after her husband better. Lizian sighed, thinking that this was exactly how balls were. People spoke as if they were concerned, but they were really only interested in gossiping about lovers' quarrels and political scandals, never thinking of the victims. She noted bitterly that the only difference today was that she wasn't the topic. She decided it wasn't a conversation worth joining and turned to walk away. However, one of the women called out to her, asking what she thought. Lizian froze, asking what they were referring to. The woman clarified she was asking about Baron Secreto and Lady Bruni, mentioning the rumors of their secret meetings. Another woman, with pink pigtails, giggled and said she was curious about Lizian's thoughts. Lizian tried to deflect, saying it wasn't her place to say, but the woman with pigtails pressed on, sarcastically calling Lizian proper and arguing that since they were behaving indecently, there was nothing wrong with talking about them. She accused Lizian of trying to take their side. Lizian's expression hardened. She clarified that wasn't what she said. The woman laughed dismissively, saying she understood Baron Secreto because Lady Bruni was no spring chicken, though still appealing. She added that everyone knew married women could be temperamental and asked if one could blame a man for wanting to run away. Lizian clenched her fist, her patience snapping. She asked what the woman could possibly mean by that. The woman smirked, asking if it bothered Lady Rottweiler. She claimed that since they didn't have a proper marriage, the man was entitled to run away. Lizian cut her off sharply, stating he shouldn't run away. She glared at the women, declaring that regardless of who they were, people had the right to be happy and fulfill their desires. But, she added firmly, if one person's happiness relied on another's misfortune, that was plainly wrong. She called it a shameful and underhanded thing to do. The women looked shocked. The woman with pigtails stammered, asking what Lizian was doing. Lizian continued, telling her not to speak so easily of other people's misfortune and stating that her air of smug superiority was extremely unbecoming. Furious, the woman demanded to know if Lizian was quite finished. Lizian's friend, Welsh L. Corgi, suddenly burst out laughing. She snorted and cackled, asking her companion if that wasn't hilarious. She wiped a tear from her eye, apologizing but saying it was so satisfying to see. The woman with pigtails, humiliated, demanded to know if Lady Corgi was laughing at her. She threatened that if she didn't apologize instantly, she wouldn't forget this humiliation. Welsh smiled sweetly, asking what she would ever do and questioning if the woman even had the power to do anything to her. The woman stomped her foot in rage, calling it disrespect and announcing she was leaving. As she stormed off, Lizian called out her name, Lady Rottweiler. The woman turned. Lizian introduced herself properly to the other woman, Lies de Poodle, apologizing for not being able to introduce herself in the commotion earlier. Lies smiled, saying her friend had made quite a fuss. Lizian looked confused, asking if they were doing introductions. Welsh raised her hand, introducing herself as Welsh L. Corgi, noting they might already know her. She said they were both quite interested in learning more about Lizian and asked if she would talk with them for a while. Lizian's eyes widened in surprise, and she agreed enthusiastically. Later, the three women sat in the garden having tea. Welsh mentioned she had heard a lot about Lizian from her father, noting that Lizian was already directly involved in her family's work and had even developed new firearms at such a young age. Lizian modestly replied that she was flattered, saying it was an honor to personally meet the young talent of the Merchants Guild. Welsh laughed, scratching her head, and said Lizian was too kind, claiming she only did what anyone could do if they worked hard. She added that Liz was actually more of a hard worker than she was. She explained that while Liz acted all prim and proper, she had learned 8 languages on her own. Liz closed her eyes, telling Welsh she gave her too much credit and that she simply found them interesting. Welsh teased her, asking her to be honest and admit she was waiting for her to say that. Liz denied it with a smile. Lizian sipped her tea, wondering how they could be so different but get along so well. Liz then mentioned she heard Madame Chartrix made Lizian's dress. Lizian confirmed it, saying she made it specifically for this ball and offered to introduce her to them. Liz said she couldn't speak for Welsh, but she would be honored, complimenting the dress as truly beautiful. Welsh grinned, suggesting a toast was in order. She raised her hand, inviting them to raise a glass. A servant pouring wine into a glass, Welsh smiled warmly, saying she felt as though she had made some like-minded friends. Liz added that it would be their honor to become friends with Lady Rottweiler. Lizian smiled back. Welsh raised her glass, proposing a toast to their friendship. The 3 glasses clinked together in the sunlight. From a distance, Liz watched her friend Welsh down her drink. She sighed, noting that Welsh was at it again. Lizian asked what was wrong. Liz shook her head, saying it was nothing, just a feeling that when those two met, something was bound to happen. Suddenly, Lizian's attention was drawn elsewhere. She spotted a young woman with silver hair standing alone. She wondered if she was a servant, but then realized with a start that it was Princess Maltese. Liz sighed again, remarking that the princess really had a way of making people worry. Welsh, however, seemed annoyed. She bickered with Liz, asking why she even bothered worrying when it would only give her a headache. Liz countered that it wasn't that easy, pointing out that people were obviously bad-mouthing the princess and asking how she was supposed to ignore it. Welsh dismissed the gossip as the words of fools and asked why Liz cared. Lizian sipped her wine, listening to their banter but staying silent. Liz noticed her gaze and sighed, saying she would never get through to Welsh. She then pointed out that the princess was looking at Lizian this time. Lizian laughed nervously, asking if Lady Maltese was really looking in her direction, but then she overheard whispers nearby. 2 noblewomen were gossiping, asking if Lady Maltese and Lady Empty were talking about Herd. One giggled, admitting she wanted to ignore them but it bothered her, wondering what reason they could have to go after her this time. Lizian looked over and saw Adele playing in the garden. The gossiping women were looking right at him. Adele turned, smiling brightly, oblivious to the malice directed at him. Lizian's expression darkened. She realized they were mocking a young child right in front of her. Furious, she stood up abruptly, excusing herself. She dashed across the garden, her heels clicking on the stone path. She thought to herself, "You dare to insult me and my child. Did you really think I would sit idly by?" She confronted the 2 women. Lady Maltese, the silver-haired princess, and Lady Empty, the woman with pink pigtails. Lady Empty looked confused. Lizian demanded to know what was so amusing, asking if she could join the conversation. Lady Empty sneered, saying she was there to spoil their fun. She hotly told Lizian that if she wanted to join, she should show some courtesy to Lady Maltese first. Lizian apologized sarcastically for her rudeness. Lady Maltese, looking pale and uncomfortable, greeted Lizian quietly, saying it had been a while. Lizian ignored the pleasantries and turned her glare on Lady Empty. She remarked that Lady Maltese didn't seem to have a thing to say, thinking to herself, what a bitch. The woman was for letting her friend do the dirty work. Lady Empty smirked, telling Lizian not to read too much into it. She claimed they were just worried that His Highness's banquet would be sullied by a few fools who didn't know their place. Lizian laughed coldly, agreeing that it was concerning and noting that she had indeed seen a few fools running their mouths about other people earlier. She added that some people were just so foolish they couldn't even recognize what was right in front of them. Lady Maltese tried to intervene, asking them to behave, but Lady Empty ignored her, protesting. "But my lady." Lady Maltese scolded them, saying civility was a virtue and asking why they were tearing each other down. She complimented Lizian, calling her as gracious as ever. Just then, a heavy thud of footsteps approached. Lady Maltese went pale. Lizian noticed her reaction, wondering why she looked so terrified. She realized it was because the Crown Prince had asked her, Lizian, to dance first, and Maltese must be jealous. Lady Empty seized the moment to twist the knife. She congratulated Lizian on being chosen by the Crown Prince for the first dance, insinuating he wouldn't have done so unless he had feelings for her. She added that His Highness must have fallen for Lady Maltese's beauty, trying to pit the 2 women against each other. Lizian, however, was unfazed. She simply stated she was quite in awe, saying the 2 of them looked like a work of art together and must be destined for each other. Lady Maltese blushed furiously. Lady Empty, frustrated that her insults weren't landing, snapped, "Nuff," and stammered out Lady Maltese's name. Lizian thanked them and turned to leave. Lady Maltese, overwhelmed by Lizian's unexpected kindness, stammered that Lizian spoke too highly of her and asked to be excused. She then fled the scene. Lizian called after her to wait, but the princess was gone. Left alone, Lizian pondered the strange interaction. She thought something was definitely off. The Crown Prince might not be a great man, but he was an eligible bachelor. Why was the princess trying so hard to avoid him? And she was the daughter of the Duke of Maltese. Lysian decided that if she wanted to find out more, she would need to talk to the Duke himself. Meanwhile, inside the ballroom, Gray stood alone, holding a glass of wine. A group of noblewomen giggled nearby, admiring his handsome, sculpted face. They approached him, asking what he looked for in a woman, slender women or strong ones. Gray stared blankly ahead, not responding. One woman giggled, noting he was popular. Another observed that he looked like he was posing even when just standing there, mistaking his silence for deep thought. In reality, Gray's internal monologue revealed he was just spacing out, his mind a simple loop of work, home, food. His reverie was broken by a voice saying, "Excuse me, my lord." Gray blinked, his sharp eyes focusing as he turned to see who had interrupted his spacing out. Lysian approached the group of noblewomen surrounding Gray in the garden and politely asked if she could have a moment of his time. Gray immediately turned his attention to her, correcting himself as he addressed her as Lady Rottweiler. He apologized to the other ladies, explaining that he didn't mean to take himself away from the fun but that the matter was very important. He told Lysian he would like to speak with her immediately and suggested they continue the conversation outside. As they walked away, the noblewomen cried out for their lord not to go, asking if he would be coming back. Once they were alone on the balcony, Gray asked what she wanted to discuss. Lysian stated there was something she wanted to hear from him, assuming he would know about it. She asked him to tell her about Lady Maltese and the Crown Prince, sensing that something significant had happened between them. Gray confirmed that something had definitely happened, but his expression turned serious as he warned her that what he was about to say was very sensitive. Suddenly, Gray asked Lysian to give him her hand. Before she could react, he grabbed it and pulled her abruptly into his embrace. Lysian blushed deeply, stammering and asking what he was doing, pointing out that she could have come closer on her own. Gray held her tight, whispering that he had told her this was a sensitive topic and the information could not reach anyone else's ears. He then agreed to explain. Gray revealed that Lady Maltese was once in love with His Highness. He explained that her love was eventually reciprocated, but she ultimately grew to despise him. Lysian looked up in confusion, asking how that was possible if she had loved him. Gray sighed, describing it as the same old story. He narrated how a beautiful lady with long, shiny hair fell in love with a handsome prince. She confessed her passionate love and they began to meet in secret. However, Gray continued, the problem was what happened next. The scene shifted to a dark memory where the prince slapped Lady Maltese. Gray stated bluntly that he hit her. Lysian was shocked, asking how he could do such a thing. Gray explained that was when her fear and hatred began. He admitted that he only understood her hatred once he learned the full truth. He said the couple was happy at first and Lady Maltese wished to be with him forever, delighted by his words and affection. But her happiness faded as quickly as a flower withering without water when the prince showed his true colors. Gray described how, while meeting in secret, she inevitably found herself at the mercy of his violence. Lysian wondered if there was a reason, questioning how Maltese could be so full of herself just because the Highness spent time with her, but Gray cut to the tragic reality. He revealed that even her family wasn't on her side, they silenced her and kept it all under wraps. He described how her family laughed, suggesting it might be a good thing and that perhaps the prince could knock some sense into her. To them, the future of the family was more important than any personal indignity she suffered. Lysian visualized the young Maltese screaming that she hated him more than anything in the world. Gray concluded that, at the end of the day, she was simply a girl who was struck by the one she loved. Lysian asked if there was really not a single person in her family who tried to help. Gray explained that the Maltese household had been currying favor with the royal family for generations, and even now, the majority of her family was on His Highness's side. He stated firmly that they would never have taken her side. Lysian thought to herself that hearing this didn't immediately erase the ill will Maltese showed toward her, but she felt she understood what her brother meant when he told her to keep the crown prince at arm's length. She wondered if her brother had known about this. Gray rubbed his temples, admitting he had a lot of mixed feelings. Lysian realized this was likely why the emperor had cast the crown prince out. Gray then compared the two princes. He described Prince Rodan as wise and upstanding, noting that due to his good nature, he would likely be a good emperor. On the other hand, he warned that Prince Therion had no problem stepping on the heads of others. Gray predicted that if someone like him became the emperor, he would likely start by purging the empire of Prince Rodan and the families that followed him, hanging anyone who protested. Gray continued his analysis, noting that the Samoyed family was loyal to the next emperor, meaning most of them would remain in the crown prince's back pocket. He added that Theron would surely have a hold on the Maltese family as well. Lysian, looking concerned, asked about the Doberman household, confirming that his family was neutral. Gray hesitated for a moment, his hand resting on the stone railing. After a long pause, he looked at her with a soft expression and confirmed that they were, as the Doberman family had always served the current emperor. Lysian looked down, worried that if a family like that wouldn't take sides now, a change was most certainly coming. She clenched her fist against her dress, thinking that no matter what that change was, she hoped she wouldn't lose him. Lysian looked down with a melancholic expression, admitting that there wasn't much she could do for him right now. She forced a small smile, murmuring that she supposed all she could do was smile. Gray looked at her with a soft, affectionate gaze and returned the smile. He gently brushed his hand against her cheek, telling her that was right. He confessed that he was happy just seeing her smile like that, adding that she looked beautiful when she did. Lizen's face flushed bright red. She stammered, asking why he was suddenly saying such things and accusing him of being weird. Gray grinned mischievously, insisting it was true. Lizian looked away, flustered, and asked if he was flirting with her right now. Gray playfully replied that who knew, before suggesting they go inside since it was cold out. Lizian, still blushing, demanded he answer her properly, but he simply led her away. Meanwhile in the garden, a young boy named Nix Del Samoyed hung upside down from a tree branch, sighing loudly about how bored he was. He complained that there was nothing fun to do, and that his only friend was always reading books. Sitting at the base of the tree, Jarkin Metal Hound, the youngest son of Count Hound, adjusted his glasses and told Nix to stop whining. He retorted that if Nix wanted to play, he should play by himself. Nix dropped down from the tree, landing in front of Jarkin. He asked how Jarkin could come all the way to a banquet just to read, reminding him this wasn't a library. Jarkin, looking annoyed, replied that he acted this way because he had to have enough common sense for the both of them, calling Nix a complete idiot. Nix tried to cajole him into playing, suggesting they look for frogs in the well, but Jarkin ignored him. Frustrated, Nix swung his legs from the tree branch, kicking at the air and complaining that Jarkin was mean. Jarkin shot back that Nix was one to talk, considering everyone called him the problem child. Nix sighed again, fixing his hair. He mentioned that he wanted to befriend the prince from the rumors, but he didn't know where he was. He complained that inside was just a bunch of dumb adults dancing and asked if he couldn't just go home and swing his sword around. Seeing Jarkin ignore him again, Nix declared he was bored. Jarkin slammed his book shut, realizing that Nix's boredom had reached its peak. He knew that if he didn't give him something to do, things would get ugly. Jarkin envisioned the chaos Nix would cause. Tripping people, breaking pitchers with his slingshot, and scaring servants by leaving frogs in baskets. Refusing to have his reading time cut short by Nix's childish rebellions, Jarkin stood up. He told Nix to wait while he looked for something for him to play with. Nix grumbled but agreed. Jarkin scanned the area and spotted a little girl leading a small boy by the hand near the building. He pointed them out to Nix. Nix squinted, recognizing the boy as Edelweiss Rue Rottweiler. He recalled the gossip about him being the child without a father and laughed to himself. Jarkin told him to go play with Adele if he was so bored. Nix scoffed, asking why the prince would be with a kid like that. One without a proper family. Nix smirked, deciding he could at least see what kind of kid Adele was. He told Jarkin he would be back and to play on his own. Jarkin muttered that he didn't need to be told that. As Nix walked away, Jarkin thought to himself that Adele might be a little young for him to dump Nix on, but decided it wasn't his problem and that the kid would manage. Nix approached Adele, who was crouching on the ground looking at some sparrows. Nix cleared his throat loudly to get his attention. When Adele looked up with wide, innocent eyes, Nix immediately started his antagonism. He stated that he heard Adele didn't have a father. Adele tilted his head, confused, and repeated the word father. Nix asked if he didn't know what a father was. Adele replied that he did know, it was a dad. Nix leaned in, asking aggressively why he didn't have one then, asking if he died or ran off. Adele looked unbothered and simply said he didn't know, then asked if he really needed a father. Nix was flabbergasted. He shouted, asking if Adele was an idiot. He declared that a proper family had a mother and a father, and it was weird not to have one. Nix squinted at Adele, thinking that since he didn't have a father, it made sense he never learned something so simple. Adele sat silently, looking down. Nix smirked, thinking he had taken the bait and was about to throw a tantrum.